Part 1 expanded 700 words. The desert stretched endlessly, a cracked ocean of shimmering gold beneath the ruthless sun. Heat rippled off the dunes like ghosts dancing, and every breath tasted of dust and thirst. Yet Alira walked forward with steady determination, her red cloak billowing behind her like a flame refusing to die. She could feel hundreds of eyes on her as the crowd gathered around the crude wooden platform in the village square, a place where fate was bought and sold with coin and cruelty. Today, fate had a name. They called him Savage. Alira had heard stories. Everyone had. Tales of a monstrous man who broke iron manacles with his bare hands, who fought 10 soldiers at once, who didn't speak, not because he couldn't, but because beasts didn't need words. Most people avoided the auctions entirely when a criminal of this level was presented. But today the villagers pressed together eagerly, hungry to witness the humiliation of something they feared. And something inside Alira, something quiet but fierce, pulled her toward the chaos. The wooden platform creaked beneath the weight of the prisoner. He was kneeling, wrists bound behind him with thick, rusted chains. Dried blood clung to his skin like war paint. His hair was tangled, hanging over his face in dark ropes. But she noticed his eyes the moment she came close enough to see them, sharp, alive, burning with defiance that even brutality could not extinguish. He lifted his chin just enough to glare at the crowd, and the villagers pulled back instinctively despite the chains. A low murmur rippled through them. "Don't get too close," a bearded merchant warned Alira when he saw her trying to step nearer. "That thing crushed 3 guards last time they tried to move him. Hit one so hard you could hear the bones break from across the yard." The word thing made her jaw tighten. "He's chained," she replied, her voice steady despite the unease crawling up her spine. The merchant snorted. Chains didn't stop him before. But he stepped out of her path anyway. The auctioneer, a sweaty man with a permanent sneer carved into his lips, strutted across the platform like he ruled the desert itself. He enjoyed this, being the master of another's misery. With a dramatic flourish, he cracked a whip against the prisoner's back. The man didn't cry out. He just lifted his head a fraction higher, eyes narrowing. His muscles tensed but not in surrender, in challenge. "See for yourself," the auctioneer shouted. "A wild animal, dangerous, unpredictable, and perfect for anyone who needs an enforcer, or an executioner." The crowd roared with approving laughter. Someone threw a stone, someone else spat, children mimicked their parents, chanting, "Savage, savage," as if it were a game. Alira felt something twist deep inside her. Revulsion, anger, compassion, maybe all of them at once. The prisoner didn't flinch when the stone hit him. He didn't bow his head when the insults came. He held himself like a king even as his knees dug into the splintered wood. Another crack of the whip echoed. This time she reacted before reason could stop her. "Don't hurt him." The words exploded out of her, startling even herself. The crowd fell into a stunned silence. Dozens of heads turned toward her, some confused, others furious, many entertained. Alira's pulse hammered wildly in her throat, but she did not back down. She stepped right up to the platform's edge. "I said, don't hurt him." Her voice didn't tremble. The auctioneer blinked, then laughed, the sound ugly and mocking. "You," he scoffed. "A slip of a girl wants to protect a killer. What? Feel sorry for him?" Alira met the captive's eyes. They were searching her face, not with hope, but disbelief. Part 2 expanded 700 words. The desert. Nights were colder than most people believed, cold enough to seep through bone, cold enough to make even the bravest shiver if they weren't prepared. Alira sat near the fire she'd built, rubbing her hands together as sparks drifted upward and vanished into the black sky. Behind her, a ruined archway of crumbling stone offered partial shelter. The structure had once been a watchtower, maybe, but now it was nothing more than jagged rocks and eerie silhouettes. Kale sat just outside the circle of firelight. She'd unshackled his ankles earlier, giving him enough freedom to walk without stumbling, but the heavy iron cuffs still bound his wrists. He didn't try to break them. He didn't even try to approach. Instead, he stayed in the shadows like a lone wolf observing a stranger's camp, deciding whether she was threat or prey. He hadn't spoken once since leaving the auction. Alira stirred the pot over the fire, her last portion of lentils and spiced grain. She wasn't sure if he would eat it, but she had no intention of starving the man she'd fought to save. As the fire crackled softly, she found herself glancing toward the dark outline of him again. He was sitting perfectly still. Too still, like he was holding himself in place only by sheer force of will. "You're free to come closer," she said carefully. The fire's warm. Kale didn't move. She hesitated, wondering if she'd misjudged everything, if she'd rescued a man who didn't want saving, if he hated her for buying him, or if she'd simply been a fool blinded by some stubborn ideal. You don't have to trust me, she continued, but I'm not going to hurt you. Still nothing. Silence again. It was becoming heavy, almost suffocating. Then, out of nowhere, his voice broke through the night like a jagged blade. Why? She startled, the ladle slipping from her fingers and clattering against the metal pot. Kale's voice was deep, gravelly, like stone grating on stone. It carried years of disuse, but not weakness. Every syllable was edged with suspicion. He rose slowly, stepping just far enough into the firelight for her to see his expression, hard, unreadable, eyes glowing faintly with reflected flame. Why did you buy me? He demanded. Alira drew in a breath. Because they were hurting you. That's not an answer. His chains rattled softly as he moved another step closer. He wasn't threatening her, but the air around him was charged, vibrating with the tension of a man standing at the edge of a cliff. You could have walked away, Kale said darkly. Everyone else did. You had no reason to intervene. I had a reason, she whispered. What? His voice rose, harsh and raw. Pity. You think saving a monster makes you righteous. Her heart clenched at the word. You're not a monster. His jaw tightened. You don't know what I've done. Maybe not, she said softly, but I know what I saw. He scoffed. And what did you see? A man, she answered without hesitation. A man in pain. A man chained like an animal. A man who deserved a chance to stand again. He froze. Something flickered in his eyes, confusion, disbelief, maybe anger. He looked away sharply, as though the intensity of her gaze was too much to bear. For a long moment he didn't speak, and Alira wondered if she'd pushed too far. Then he stepped toward the fire and sat down stiffly, still keeping a careful distance. The chains on his wrists clinked as he adjusted his posture. His breathing had slowed, but the tension radiating from him was undeniable. She handed him a bowl of food. He stared at it like he wasn't sure if it was real. Slowly, cautiously, he took it. Their fingers brushed briefly, and Alira felt him flinch as though the touch shocked him. Part 3 expanded 700 words. By the 10th day of their journey, the desert had begun to feel less hostile, not because it had softened, but because Kale had begun to move differently. His steps were no longer those of a man shackled by fear or anger, they were measured, deliberate, aware. Each footfall held the weight of someone testing the fragile ground between survival and trust. He carried the supplies she distributed, watched their perimeter at night, and even, hesitantly, tried speaking in small, clipped sentences. Words that sounded strange coming from a man who had been called savage for so long. Alira noticed the change each time he allowed a small detail of himself to show. A shrug that hinted at humor, a glance at the horizon that held curiosity rather than suspicion. She caught him humming one night, a low, raspy sound, and had nearly dropped her water jug from disbelief. But he'd stopped the moment he realized she had heard, muttering a curt, "Don't look." And yet, the moment remained lodged in her mind, proof that the man behind the chains was emerging. They had made camp near a jagged ridge that offered both shelter and a vantage point. The sun was setting in a fiery haze, painting the sky with molten gold and crimson. Kale sat on a rock, cleaning his hands with a cloth, while Alira set up their modest cooking fire. It was quiet, the kind of silence that held its breath, waiting for it to be broken. That quiet shattered with the sound of hooves on the horizon. 5 riders appeared, their armor glinting in the dying light, crests of a notorious slave battalion cutting sharp shapes against the sky. Alira's stomach dropped. These were the men who had captured Kale months ago, the ones who had labeled him savage, the ones who had inflicted so much pain that it had become part of his very essence. "Step aside, girl," the lead captain barked as they approached, his eyes cold and merciless. "We're taking the beast back." Kale rose to his full height, moving in front of Alira like a living shield. The ground beneath his boots seemed to vibrate with the force of his presence, and the men's confidence faltered just slightly. "He's mine," Alira said firmly, planting her feet. "Legally, he belongs to me. He's property," the captain snapped, spitting the word as though it were venom. "Property doesn't get opinions. Property doesn't choose." Kale's chains jingled as he shifted, his gaze fixed on the approaching riders. And then something inside him snapped, not a surge of uncontrolled rage, but a sudden, precise clarity. He gripped a discarded spear shaft with hands scarred, rough, and built for violence. The first soldier reached for Alira. Kale moved like a coiled spring, dragging the spear across the man's chest, sending him sprawling in the sand. Another lunged for her. Kale was faster than thought possible, intercepting the man with a heavy block, then twisting him to the ground. The fight unfolded like a storm, fast, brutal, efficient. But Kale's movements were precise. He struck to disarm, to disable, not to kill. Every action was deliberate, controlled, a testament to a man learning restraint. When it was over, the captain was kneeling in the sand, chest heaving, cursing under his breath. The other soldiers had fled, leaving the desert silent once more except for the crackle of Alira's fire. Kale dropped the spear, chest heaving, eyes wide as he searched her face. "Did I?" he began, but the words faltered. "You protected me," Alira whispered, moving toward him. Her hand brushed against his arm, gentle but grounding. He looked down at her, a flicker of uncertainty in his gaze. "You saved me first," he muttered, voice rough but sincere. For the first time, the walls he had built around himself, the rage, the suspicion, the isolation, cracked. The man who had been called savage realized that he had been seen, truly seen, by someone who didn't flinch at his darkness. Alira smiled faintly, letting the warmth of the fire mirror the warmth blossoming in her chest. "What now?" she asked softly. Kale's eyes wandered to the horizon, where the sun had fully disappeared and the first stars were burning through the sky. Then he looked back at her, and for a long moment, the desert held its breath. "I choose to stay," he said quietly, firmly, as if the words themselves were a promise to himself. Alira nodded, understanding more than she could express. The desert wind swept across the dunes, but this time it carried no sting of dust or threat. Instead, it seemed to hum with possibility. The man who had been called savage was gone, replaced by someone else entirely, someone capable of trust, of restraint, of life beyond chains. Together, they moved toward the ridge where the night sky stretched infinitely above them, each step measured, shared, and forward-looking. The fire crackled behind them, a small beacon in the vast darkness, and for the first time, both of them felt the fragile, yet undeniable, weight of hope.